Same, but different. That's going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. So depending on where you've been, this might be a phrase that you've heard a bit, someone saying same, but different. And basically it means that while something might seem basically the same, it's actually completely different or quite different in some way. Now, I'm going to talk about this in relationship first to some of the travels that I've been doing lately. If you've been following the vlog, you know I'm traveling around quite a bit at the moment, and I have this interesting period of time right now in between places where I need to be for some teaching and some other things related to Qigong. And so I'm taking the opportunity to just explore a few places during this time. Now, I'm still working. It's not like I'm just being a tourist. I'm still working quite a lot of time, you know, sitting on my computer and interacting with people in live sessions and so on. Those of you who are doing some of the courses at the moment will know, yeah, I'm still busy working. But it's been an interesting opportunity to explore some different places, some different cultures, learn a few things about some history and so on. So I'm going to talk about it first in relationship to this, and then I will come back and talk a little bit about Chinese philosophy and maybe how it might apply to Qigong as well. So one of the things that has been really interesting for me, because I did spend a bit of time in Asia, a few different countries in Asia, and now I'm in Europe, and I've been in a few different countries in Europe, 3 countries that I've never been in before. But I've also been in some neighboring countries previously, so I already had a bit of understanding about the people here, about the history here. But there's something different about actually being there in a specific place and learning about the specific history and having contact with the specific people. And for me, a big part of my learning, I guess, and what I experience is my experience of the energy in a place. And that's the energy both of the physical location, the nature and things like that, but then also the energy of the people. The energy of the people plays a big role in the overall energy of any place. I mean, we as humans, we have a big effect on the physical environment wherever we go, but also our energy affects the energy of a place a lot as well. And so the countries that I've been spending some time in are all in Eastern Europe at the moment. And again, as I mentioned, I have been in some other, you know, nearby countries previously. So I had a fair understanding of the history of these different countries. And it's been interesting though, being in some of these countries and hearing and talking to people, learning some of the history, and a lot of the history is similar. They're very similar things that happened. You know, a lot of the history in this part of the world relates to, well, the Ottomans, from the Ottoman Empire coming through and then getting pushed out and then coming through again. And from the other side, the Austro-Hungarians coming through and sometimes being pushed out and sometimes staying for longer and so on. And then some other bits and pieces from history as well. Some of the more recent history, again, has been similar. These countries have either been under communist or socialist rule in different forms and so on, and that fell all around the same time. And then they've had different history going on beyond that as well. But so many similarities, and yet those differences in the history of those different of these different countries has made quite a difference in shaping, well, the culture to some extent. I mean, the cultures are quite similar as well, but certainly the energy of the people in these places. For me, the difference in the energy is really quite marked. Um, and and the way I explore this, the way I experience it is, you know, in the first place, when I'm somewhere, I first experience the energy. And then as I learn about the history, it's interesting to sort of be able to line things up in terms of what I've experienced of the energy, and to be able to, as I think like, okay, well, that piece of history probably explains that, and this other piece of history probably goes a long way to explaining this sort of nuance and the quality of the energy of people in these areas. So I've found it fascinating to be able to experience these quite distinct differences in the energy of both the people and the places that I've been visiting, when they have so much in common. In broad brushstrokes, so much of their history is so similar, and even often their geography is so similar. And yet and look, some of the differences, I wouldn't say they're small, but when you consider how much they have in common, the relatively small differences in their history have shaped them in quite distinctive ways. There's another part to this as well, which I find quite concerning, and particularly in Europe at the moment, where some people, certainly not all people, but particularly in some political conversations recently, there are some people who really emphasize these differences, not in a way of appreciation of the differences, not in a way of understanding those differences, but as a way to keep separate and even to create opposition, to really essentially say like, oh, we're completely different from each other, which of course is nonsense. If we go back to that saying, same, but different. There's two sames, only one different. The whole point being, there's so much similarity sometimes, but yet we still have a difference. Now, I think it's a shame to see this kind of focus on difference to create division. I think there's a different way that we can come about this, a different, very healthy way to come about this, which is when we do recognize those differences, we do then appreciate those differences, but still recognize how much we are the same. One of my, I guess, little experiences while I've been traveling, so I took an overnight train from Brasov in Romania through to Budapest in Hungary. And in the cabin with me, there was a 79-year-old German man and a woman. I didn't talk to her so much, who was also, she wasn't as old, but she might have been late 60s or 70s or so, I suppose. And she didn't speak much. Who I gather that she was Romanian but also spoke German. This German man didn't. I think he spoke Romanian German too, but did not speak any English, whereas the woman did speak a little bit of English. Anyway, this man from time to time wanted to chat, even though I don't speak any German or any Romanian, and he didn't speak any English, and he wanted to chat, and it was interesting that we were still able to communicate to a fair degree. I would say a lot of the time I could understand about 50% of what he was saying. Sometimes that dropped down to more like 20%. And other times it was more. Sometimes it might have been 90%. But we were able to communicate quite a bit. And every now and then, when just a message just was not getting through, he would ask the woman who was in the cabin and what a word was for something or something. And then we'd be able to understand what we were talking about. And I learned a little bit about him. Well, for a start, that he's 79, that he lives in Germany, in Frankfurt now, that he fled Romania as a refugee in 1988. And that now half of his family lives in Germany and half lives in Romania, and so he was back visiting family. I learnt that he left Romania. When he left Romania, he was about the same age as I am now. Not exactly the same, but similar. He had initially thought I was much younger, but I said, oh, no. I told him my real, my age, and he's like, oh, that's about the same age that he was when he left. And he said it was the best time of his life. It was, one of the best times, which was nice. He was, obviously trying to be nice and encouraging towards me, which was great. And so we were able to, even though we didn't speak the same language, we were able to communicate quite well. Now, linguistically, there's some similarities between German and English, so of course that helps. But a lot of it was because, the message wasn't about the language. The message was a human message. He was talking about his life, his experiences, his family. And there's another layer to communication there that is, you could say, universal in a way, in that it's a human message. Language is not about the words. It's about sending and receiving understanding messages, and I was able to understand his messages a lot of the time, and he was able to understand mine, even though we didn't share a language in common. And I think that's largely true of all of humanity, not necessarily in terms of language and communicating, but we have so much in common. And it's really important that we remember that, be able to remember what we have the same and appreciate what we have which is different, and not let that divide us. I think there's a healthy way to do that. And I think the Chinese culture, now note I say culture, not necessarily Chinese politics, probably not Chinese politics, but the Chinese culture is really good at this, at recognizing similarities, recognizing patterns, also recognizing differences, and sometimes very subtle differences, and having this balance and understanding and appreciation of things being sometimes completely different, but also at the same time the same. If you look at it, everything has, to use another saying, two sides to a coin. There's always one side and then another side, and those two sides can be completely different from each other, but at the same time, even though they're completely different, they're still the same coin, right? And that doesn't make them separate from each other. And I think that's the case with us as humans as well. Now, bring this to not just to Chinese philosophy, but also to Qigong. Not really the main point of this vlog. Mainly it was about my experience and, how these similarities but differences in people. I guess it does tie in well though, in terms of these people with such similar history, their energy being shaped in quite distinctive ways. And we see this in different Qigong practices as well, where sometimes we'll see Qigong practices that are very, very similar to each other. And to a completely untrained person, they might go, oh, they might think that's just the same practice. To someone who's a bit more trained, is like, oh, okay, you notice the differences. And sometimes the differences can be quite small, little details, but that can then shape some of the quality of the energy and what you're doing with the energy in quite different ways. And so while the practice is same, it's also different. But then if you take a broader perspective, it's still Qigong. These different versions of different exercises, different practices are still broadly Qigong. They're part of the same family, part of the same type of practice. And so we see that in our Qigong as well. And I think it's really valuable, just as with human culture and society and so on, for us to be able to recognize and appreciate those differences. It gives us like a richer understanding, a richer appreciation of what we're doing, and we're able to shape things for ourselves in more effective ways. But at the same time, recognize the similarities, recognize how, hey, someone else might be doing a different Qigong practice, but it actually shares a lot in common with us. Unfortunately, this has been similar to some of the modern politics. This has been an issue with Qigong sometimes throughout history as well, where people have gone like, no, that's a little bit different from what I do. Therefore, they'll go as far as to say that's wrong or something bad. It's like, no, it's not wrong. It's just different. And we can appreciate those differences while recognizing the value of what we have the same and in common together. And I hope more and more in terms of Qigong, this is the direction that we're heading in. As Qigong gets taught more broadly, more widely, more and more people are understanding Qigong in a richer way, and so they're able to recognize those differences more and understand what they do more. But then also to recognize there's not one way is the right way and one way is the wrong way, and but recognize there's these many different ways, and we're all the better for it, for this richness of diversity of practice. Just as I would say on a global scale, we're all the better for the diversity of our cultures. We can have that diversity, but also recognize our sameness, our solidarity, our unity underneath that as well. Anyway, that's my vlog for today. Not all that super Qigong focused, but maybe interesting anyway. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you on another one soon.